The bike? Right here. Good evening, everyone. I would now like to call the Planning and Zoning meeting to order. And let's begin with a roll call, starting with Commissioner Kay.
Present.
Can we go back? And I know
Ann Rutke. Present.
Cindy Greengold.
Kathleen Baralt, present.
Oh, Larry Brown.
Mary Sue Greisman, present.
Kelly Hahn, present.
Thank you. And now if you will honor me and turn, and we will say the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
As Condoleezza Rice said, there is no greater challenge and there is no greater honor than to be in public service. So I just want to once again thank you all for your service to the town and to the citizens of the town in your service on the commission. Thank you. And now we will move to item number 3, approval of the October 23rd, 2024 Planning Commission agenda.
I move approval.
I'll second that.
All in favor? Stand by, please.
What is the zoning text amendment request?
The town planner has received a zoning text amendment request.
They didn't act, we thought they were going to provide us the final piece of information, but they did not. So you can table that.
Okay.
Right.
It's the one that we talked about over by Richfield Station. And you sent them a list of questions, and they had said they were getting me. So I thought it was coming, but it's not coming yet. So you can table it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or we'll delete that?
Yes, for tonight, yes. Because they needed to give additional information. We had sent back questions on their initial request, and we had sent back some clarifying questions that we asked them to respond to so we could more properly review their request, and they have not submitted it per the town planner. Okay. Any further questions, comments? Reference the approval? All in favor?
Aye.
It is passed. Approval of the minutes of the July 24th, 2024 Planning Commission meeting.
I move for the approval of the July 24th, 2024 Planning Commission meeting.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Pardon me?
I recuse myself. I wasn't here in July.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
It is passed. Do we have any public comment on any item on the agenda? Seeing none, hearing none, we will move forward. And there was a modification to the agenda, and I don't know if everybody had received that. Madam Clerk? So we, because we are honored tonight with having Jeff Foltz, who's the chairman of the Coastal Resiliency Steering Committee, with us. He's also the former chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission. God bless you. He is going to speak to us tonight about the Coastal Resiliency Plan that was adopted by the town in December of 2023. So we have switched the items in convenience to Mr. Foltz so that we will keep him here to 8 o'clock. So the new business will now precede the old business, and we will begin with the presentation by Mr. Foltz. Thank you for coming. Before you begin, everybody has their coastal resiliency plan? Okay.
So, well, I apologize, and I'm not used to being so formal, but I appreciate the chance. I haven't spoken to many of you in a while. I can't remember the last time I was. I know Kathleen and I have met several times while this process was going on. Like Kathleen mentioned, the plan was adopted by the Town Council of Chesapeake Beach back in December of 2023, and there was some. We had to get the plan submitted. It was tied to some grant money from the state of Maryland. And so in coordination with North Beach and, the parties, we were able to get that document approved and adopted by the town council about a year ago. So you're probably like, what have you done in the last year? And it's kind of, I guess what I'll do is just go a little bit over that. And just for those of you who aren't familiar, I know there's some new faces that I have seen on YouTube, but not seen in person. Just for awareness, I was the chairman of the Coastal Resiliency Steering Committee. There was also a Coastal Resiliency Committee, which was largely made up of town staff, outside consultants, the town planner, and folks like that who I would say did the lion's share of the work in putting the plan together, the draft, as we drafted it and led our discussions and did some of the engineering work that went into it. The steering committee was more of what I would say, and I'll go back to Larry's, my Navy days. We were the rudder for that resiliency committee. As they did our work, we did a lot of the public outreach. We did a lot of the discussions about, are they on the right track? Are they trying to gather the right information to allow us to develop this coastal resiliency sea level rise plan? And so we tried to give some framework, some boundaries to kind of keep it moving forward. And so it was made up of members of the town. I don't know exactly how they all got put on the committee, but we had members from some of the various impacted areas of town. We had some members from up on the C Street, Seagate area. We had some members from over here at across the street. We had some members from some local businesses, the townhouses in the back here behind Kellum's Field. So we tried to have some representation of impacted parties. But I will say one of the things moving forward that we've been asked to do, and I think we heard it through outreach, but it's also, we kind of wanted to wait till we got the plan adopted, but we're going to try to, I'd say, diversify kind of the makeup of the steering committee a little and look for some other, some parties who would like to participate on the committee outside of, this initial waterfront area. And so we'll look to diversify that. I'm not sure exactly who will lead that outreach effort, but we may take volunteers. I'm not sure, but I'll work that with town staff. But, while it was primarily waterfront focused in the initial makeup, we will look to diversify that because, again, everybody, and I think if you read through the plan, the entire town's impacted. It's not just the people who live over here. It's not just the people who live, back, behind Rod and Reel or Brownies Beach. Everybody in town is going to be impacted by sea level rise, whether you're commuting through the heart of the town or you're traversing the North Beach or wherever it is. You're going to be impacted unless you never come off the top of the hill, but that's rare for anybody in town. So, I think as we move into the new year, look for some additional members or some changing in the makeup of our steering committee. And that's my view. I haven't I haven't worked that with staff to figure out exactly how we'll do that. I think the other thing that's worth noting, and I'm not sure if it's I think it says it in the plan, it's not a master plan. So this coastal resiliency plan was not a master plan. It was not a detailed engineering plan. It was a framework to kind of analyze what would be impacted, how it's impacted, where the risks are, and then maybe target some areas that we could focus on that we, and try to gather what information we need. So what, where should we do a master plan? What's the timing for a master plan? What engineering studies do we need to do to get additional information to help the town best prepare itself to enact projects, programs, and things like that to protect itself or make it more resilient. So this is a very high level plan, but it does talk about maybe some of the areas that we could focus on and where additional engineering is needed. At the back of the plan, the last part, and maybe, so I think as we looked at the plan, it broke kind of the town up into some different areas. We had the north area, I'm drawing a blank. Larry
Highlands?
always calls it the
Highlands?
but Larry always talks about the Stinnett, flood marsh area up there, north of the firehouse up to D Street and kind of First Street at the North Beach line. It traverses over to the east on 261, out to Seagate, C Street, Horizons on the Bay. And so we have that north area that was an interesting area because that was kind of doubly impacted. So the marsh to the west of 261 is impacted by all the runoff, like you said, of the highland. So it's the drain field of everything upstream and to the west of 261. So all that, it's collecting all that water, bringing it down into the town, and then and then it has this road in front of it. That's been elevated because we need it to be elevated to try to make sure we have a solid connection to North Beach. And then on the east side of that same area and basin, we have the floodgate that's inoperable right now. And so we have water coming in through that floodgate, and then we have a pumping station that exists in the vacant parcel in front of Seagate, right at the edge of Seagate, and it's kind of one of those green spaces that's left that's been elevated. There's a pump station there, and there's some bad, I guess I could say, bad engineering with how it's operated. Not because the town selected bad engineering at the time of doing it. There were some requirements that were put on the operation of that by MDE at the time. And so we know that area was a challenge, but that was kind of the north area we looked at. As we moved south into kind of where we are today and down towards Fishing Creek was kind of our area B where we looked at, and it has its own challenges. With Fishing Creek, we want it to be, there's some great areas that are kind of what I'd call blue-green space. How do you deal with that? So we looked at, we broke it into different areas, although they're all impacted by the same thing. We're getting sea level rise on the outside. We're getting subsidence back here from just the weight of the soil. It's just natural of alluvial soils when we're in marshlands like this. So you're always going to fight that. So that's kind of how we structured the plan. And then what we did is we looked at some different strategies of how do you operate and what can be done. There's ways to build structure to try to alleviate it. There's ways to kind of adapt around it and not try to prevent it from coming in. And so we had 3 different types of strategies in there that are all laid out in the plan. We applied those and looked at those at both the north side of town and the south side of town. But as we got to the end, we had to come up with some recommendations, and we came up with 5 recommendations, and I'm just going to walk through those real quick. And one was, to formally adopt the plan. And like I said, we did that last December, and we shared it with town of North Beach because they had a similar grant as we did. And so we tried to act in concert with them because, as you all know, there's not an imaginary flood wall that separates North Beach and Chesapeake Beach. And so we want to make sure as we examine our problem that we do it in concert with the efforts that North Beach has going on. We also shared it with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources and the Coastal Service. So that was, and some of those were statutory requirements that came along with the grant that we had. The second recommendation was to formalize the Coastal Resiliency Steering Committee. I'll be honest, I'm not sure exactly. We still exist as a steering committee, and we haven't had any other guidance from what we had in the beginning. Whether that changes or not is kind of wait and see. And I think in its existence today, we're going to continue to meet as a committee and work with the staff and try to figure out where we could best use the resources we have and look at and make suggestions to the town of this might, if you have some grant money or you haven't, if there's a funding source, these are some areas that maybe you could look to gain additional information to affect the projects that you want to take on as a town. And maybe they don't do any, but we're going to continue to provide recommendations of where we think that is. We're not the funding people, we're not the approvers of projects, but we will make recommendations based on our experience and what we know of maybe where we could maybe get the most bang for the buck and what information is needed. And I'll be honest, I come at it from a civil engineering background. I'm a civil engineer by practice, so I tend to have a civil engineering background on it, but we have other people who bring other points of view, which is good because you don't want a myopic look at this because there's lots of different ways to attack this. The third one was to identify priorities for capital improvements related to the plan and update the plan every 5 years. So we're 1 year into the plan. We have a requirement to update it every 5 years. I don't think whether we wait 5 years or not, I think as we go along, we'll continue to look for capital improvement for priorities of capital improvement projects. And that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit at the end. The other thing is to continue the work begun under the plan to document the condition and ownership of the drainage systems in town that affect the townwide coastal survey. So a big part of this effort from the town staff and Jay and his team was, they were going out shooting inverts and surveys to make sure as we had, whether it was like what we call nuisance flooding or sea level rise, and again, there's lots of things happening. We have storm surge, we have nuisance flooding, we have a storm drain system that's not effective in all areas of the town because it's sitting below the discharges out into the bay. And so what the town staff did, and an important part of it is to document what our storm drainage system looks like in the town. Because before you start tinkering with it, you need to know the condition that it exists today and how it operates, and make sure we understand that so that we don't go trying to fix a problem that we're going to have third order effects because we didn't really understand that. So we want to continue that effort. They did great work. They got a lot of valuable information to understand what areas just aren't going to drain as they exist today. So that was great information. And then the last one was to coordinate with Calvert County, North Beach, and I think you all have talked about it some, or with the county all hazard mitigation plan, and so there's a lot, again, there are some more requirements that that the town has to do. So this plan should not be contradictory to the county all hazard mitigation plan. It should not be contradictory to the comprehensive plan or any of the, what are y'all working on? All the critical area stuff. And I live in it. I should know that. So, this plan should not be in contradiction with those. And we want to make sure as those plans and priorities evolve, that we stay in concert with them as we move forward. So that's kind of the charter. Those were the 5 recommendations that we had as we laid this out. Obviously, number 1, notifying North Beach and the MDE was already done. We exist as a committee right now until someone decides that it's no longer needed, or that they want it to function under some other construct. But until then, 1 and 2 are done. Number 4, continuing the drainage is in progress, and 5 is there. So where did we focus our effort? We focused our effort on some of the priorities. And one of the things we thought was, are there some quick wins? The challenge with sea level rise and coastal resiliency is that there's a lot out there. How do you deal with it? So it all takes time, and it all takes a lot of funding. But maybe there's incremental things we can do along the way. And can we get some quick wins or get some information that we need that will give us the information we need to maybe develop a longer term project that we could put forward and seek grants, funding, or however we do that. And so, what were the quick areas we could do? And so let me pull up a note, and I think Kathleen may have seen this, or I know it's great. one of the areas it was area A, which is really the Seagate area that I talked about. We had a recommendation up there to conduct an engineering study in coordination with the state of Maryland to determine how much longer the floodgate in its current configuration can remain viable and investigate the optimal solutions for flood control in that area. Again, as I mentioned, it's doubly challenged. You know, your first instinct is let's close the floodgate. When the storm's coming in, let's close the floodgate. Well, so even if it operated, close the floodgate. Well, the challenge is we have all the runoff coming down on the west side of 261. The pumping station that's up there at Seagate discharges back into that basin on the back side of the flood wall. So all you're doing is you're recirculating your water essentially, and all you're doing is compounding your flooding. So one of the things we talked about, and fortunately we were able to meet with the state of Maryland about 2 months ago. I think Holly had a meeting, and Kelly and I participated with the state of Maryland. So we met with the state of Maryland and kind of posed two questions. One, can we get permission to directly discharge to the bay? In that, when that pump station has to operate, can we pump it directly to the bay? Engineering wise, we could make that happen. There's some work that has to be done on that, but originally we didn't get a permit that allowed us to directly discharge to the bay. So those discussions are happening with MDE and DNR and maybe it's in certain situations, maybe it's not in all the time we pump, we direct discharge. And the reason they always discourage direct discharge to the bay is they'd rather it be filtered through some other medium before it goes out into the bay or whatever stream it's going to be discharged to. So we're in discussions. They are examining and trying to get to the right people to see if we can get the permit that allows us to operate that pump station to directly discharge that to the bay. If that's the case, then we could, and theoretically, the next step would be to make that floodgate operational, and then when we needed to, we could close that and we could pump back out, and it would essentially act as a barrier and not flood Seagate and 261 as much as it is. So that's one of the areas that we're currently focused on, because we think, that would be a big win for us. And that would, it doesn't completely solve the problem over there. We still have some storm drain discharge issues of where the inverts head out to the bay and things like that. But getting that operational only matters if we get the permit adjusted so we could discharge to the bay. So that's an area we're working on. We are also in discussions with the state of Maryland on 261. You may or may not have seen, if anybody is bored and watches our committee meetings, one of the things in the plan talks about 261 and the need to keep 261 viable, because right out there, it's our entry into the the treatment plant, our water treatment plant, as well as a firehouse, and those are getting impacted by that downstream flow. So 261 is a critical link to emergency resources. They've talked, there's discussion with the state about making a second entrance into the back of the water treatment plant as well as the firehouse, so that we had two alternate routes to do that. But, I think we will continue to press the state of, I know, Jan, you've been here, like back in the day, it's already been raised a couple feet from back in the day when some of us were first down here in the town, but, I think there will be consideration to, there will be continued desire, I think, from the town to ensure that road gets elevated, and that we don't just say, oh, we're going to let it go and let that get flooded in our nuisance flood situations. We'll continue to push the state to to elevate that and maintain our primary access to both the treatment plant and the firehouse.
Oh, I have a question if I
Sure.
could. It's a state road,
Yes.
so we still have to be the nudge to
We
get
do.
them to do, I mean,
We do. I mean,
Okay.
and we've talked because as we were putting this plan together, there wasn't a lot of enthusiasm from the state when we talked about it. They were kind of like, oh, we'll just let it go. But, we sent out, I don't know if it was Larry. I think there was communication that we sent to the state saying we want to continue encouraging them, because we had met with one of the young engineers from the state highway. So it's state highway owns that road, but we have a relationship with them to continue to let them know we're not just going to ignore it and put our blinders on and say, yeah, I know you guys don't want to do it. All right, thanks. You know,
But we
so we're going to
can't.
continue to challenge them on 261.
Good.
And then in area B, the other thing we talked about in area B back in the May timeframe was, kind of talking about a master plan that explored merging the flood management and the recreation area back here in the Kellums area. And I call it blue-green space. I actually just a week ago, I did a little bicycle trip from Cleveland, Cincinnati, and it was great. It was it was old rail trails and along a lot of the rivers that run and streams that run through Ohio. And you could see some of their effectiveness at this blue-green space, where when it's not flooding, it's very effective recreational space. However, the uses that they allow in there are survivable and resilient. And when it's not flooded, they're great for other uses. And that's all, that's been one of the visions. I think, we talked about it way back when in my early days on a comprehensive plan, and you all ran with some of it of just, what's that look like? Are there ways you can berm some stuff? Are there ways you can kind of direct the known flooding in those times when it occurs, that you don't ruin the end use of it, but you allow it, you control it so you don't damage the most valuable resources that you have in there. And so these blue-green spaces you'll see them throughout many of the waterfront communities around the country, whether it's the Mississippi Valley or, some of the other rivers or along coastal places. And so that was an area we said, hey, that's probably worth master planning a little bit. But when I talked to Holly, so we're now into the July timeframe, the water park's going on, the Kellums Field revitalization's going on. There's a whole lot going on, and in discussion with Holly, I suggested, and I think we all agreed, let's let some of that settle out, because if we just charge forward then we have lots of competing interests in that area, and none of it was stable at the time. So it's a very important area that should be examined and requires further study. Let's let some of these other areas and, interests that the town has going on, let's let them get a little more mature before we try to inject other things into that mix, because then you're going to have one more thing that's going to derail or somebody's going to want information. And my personal feeling was it was just going to get too hard, and we were going to waste resources on an effort that needed to be a little more mature before we move forward on it. So some would say, oh my God, you didn't really do much. But again, my focus was then the Seagate, the floodgate, the pumping station. This is important to the Coastal Resiliency Committee, but I think we'll come back to it next year when we see as these other efforts develop, and then maybe we work around those or figure out if there's tweaks to those as we move forward. So that's kind of where we are today. The other thing I guess I would say is, again, some of you may know it's election time. I think some of you were talking about before the meeting started. I think my personal feeling is I would like to, I'm not going to push any new initiatives this year. I would like to see just let the results happen. We have a plan of where we need to go, but I think in fairness to whatever the administration looks like and the makeup of the administration, I think that's something that should be discussed, and it would be incumbent on me to come with Holly and meet with them after the elections are over, and then talk about where do we go in 2025. I have ideas, but I think I don't want to force an agenda right now. I think I would wait and just have some discussion, maybe get some direction from them of where they would like to see it, where they would like to see this committee kind of focus its efforts in 2025. With that, that's kind of the extent of what I wanted to share. But if anybody wants to ask questions, I'll do my best to answer them. I haven't read the plan in a few months, but I spent enough time, I think I could maybe talk about it. Sure. Go ahead, Mary Sue.
I was a little confused, or maybe not confused, but with the floodgate not being operable. Similar to you. I have you stretch, but it's inoperable. And if it were to be fixed, irrespective of, I guess you were changing, asking the state to be able to have water flow into the bay.
Out,
Yes.
out over the seawall. So we would discharge out through the seawall out into the bay.
But without that happening, if just fixing the floodgate by itself.
Won't help us.
Huh?
That won't help us.
Okay, that's, okay.
It won't help us because
Need both together.
because we discharge into that same basin.
Got it.
So all we're doing is taking water that's
Okay.
collecting in that water basin, and we're not pumping it, we're not getting it away from the problem area. We're just going to continue to flood that area.
Okay, all right, thank
You've
you. I
probably seen
understand
it
it now.
there.
Thank you.
Yeah, what would you like us to be doing?
So, I mean, I think you got, having the comprehensive plan helps understand the framework in which you guys have adopted and set out for the vision of the town of where you expect how you expect development or the town to evolve over the next 20 to 40 years. Again, you have short range stuff in there and you have some long range vision stuff. So I think the biggest thing was getting the comprehensive plan done, because that laid out some framework of what areas are important, what kind of zoning you envisioned adopting and did get adopted. And then now I think that's important before we would recommend or help maybe set the requirements of how you would do a master plan. You know, if you didn't have the comprehensive plan, if you didn't have that in place, you didn't have your zoning of where you think it needs to be today, it'd be kind of dumb to do a master plan thinking that it might change down the road. So I think that was the most critical part to get done to this. I think the other part would just be, I think there may
Well,
need to be.
let me ask about a couple things
All right,
here.
because there is one thing.
Yeah, it says, amend the zoning ordinance to prohibit from areas mapped all group homes, convalescent centers, nursing homes, hospitals. So that's one thing we could.
And that was back here, and I think it was in area B, and our thought was, and I think you guys talked about it in the comprehensive plan was, so you don't want anywhere where you have a population that might have a harder time evacuating in a flood prone situation. Don't keep them out of that area. And I think you guys did that as you address your zoning stuff. And that was just, I mean, that was kind of one of those things. If those things are that population set that's in group homes and convalescents and things like that are more vulnerable and harder to transport if you have nuisance flooding, and let's not introduce more risk into that area for that.
So you would say that's done?
I think your zone, I haven't gone back and read all your zoning tightly, but I think that was where it was heading when I remember listening to the comprehensive plan discussions.
Okay, and then the other one was evaluate the zoning ordinance to determine what regulatory obstacles may impede property owners from raising buildings and improving their properties in ways that would protect public health and safety.
Yeah, so, all right, I may be I'm probably an outlier with this audience, but I would say there are, again, Jeff Foltz's belief, not, and again, the plan doesn't say change it. It says continue to have discussions about how those make sure when you're rewriting ordinances or text amendments or whatever you're doing in these areas that are impacted by by sea level rise, make sure we really look at the second and third order effects. And what I would mean by that is we have a lot of small lots there. And I know there's a desire, we don't want to make areas impervious because we're right by the water. It affects the critical area stuff. But then when you constrain, the height, when you constrain there's I'm gonna put my engineering hat. There's a lot of solutions I think you can come up with to deal with water treatment, water capture, some things like that, runoff, and still treat it without negatively impacting maybe all the things. And I don't think the answer is just let's make more, let's really shrink the footprint of what we're allowed to put on those lots. Let's really think about what does that mean when we do it? You know, is it impervious pavement or not? Is it pervious pavement? You know, solutions that you can do that maybe better optimize how you use some of those sites that are more challenged in a critical area than other sites. And I think my belief, there are what works maybe up on top of the hill may not be the best solution when you get down in some of the smaller waterfront areas. And we need to, I think I would challenge you all to really think about how, when you write those and you write them restrictively, what does that really mean? And maybe there are engineering solutions that we've overlooked that could be incorporated into it. And maybe it's not a one size fits all from a zoning ordinance perspective. And that's
Right now, the ordinance is the same
I know.
throughout Chesapeake Beach,
I
which is
understand.
a
Talking
35
height of
foot
buildings are.
height limit
Yeah.
with no
Yep.
allowance for raising
Yeah, I
the
understand.
building.
I know.
So
I
That
never
is
write it.
what you were talking about, right?
What's that?
That is what you.
Well,
were
I mean,
alluding to.
it's just part of, I mean, it's part of it. Again, I think
Sure.
there's, again, how it's all, and I think, you know, there's different calculations you do on what you can build, you know, on how you calculate stuff within the critical area and things like that. And so I think don't be afraid to, I would challenge you not to be afraid to examine some of those ordinances as you go back and you take looks at these things. Again, what's adopted is adopted. And I have all that, but I think as we continue to study this, I think it's an area where you may have people bringing up other ideas or looking at ways to do it slightly differently and not have a one size fits all. And that's just my experience. Yes.
Another question. Do you anticipate at any point, assuming that we do different things, you know, that we
Right.
have a vision for, that we will have to move critical structures, the fire department, the treatment? I mean, they're so
I don't.
low
So-
and they're
so-
surrounded.
So the treatment plant is pretty well situated. The access to it is the biggest challenge.
It is
When they
situated,
designed
but-
the plant,
Uh-huh.
we have a lot of freeboard and room to deal with some sea level rise on the plant itself. The biggest challenge is the access to get the workers and the staff in and out of there to ensure that the plant operates in all conditions. But it's not the
Freeboard.
plant itself.
Freeboard?
Freeboard, like the amount of like structure before that starts to get flooded over. Like if you look at the rod and reel down there along the waterfront and along I'm drawing a blank. It's been a long day. Our community here behind me,
Windward
Windward
Key?
Key. So they have those bulkheads, you know,
Oh, the area
Rod-
between the ground and when the,
yeah. So like Rod and Reel because of when they built and when their permit was, FEMA came in and they had a higher freeboard requirement than what they had than what was originally there before. So that as the fishing creek starts to snow, and again, that's a primary channel, as that we see sea level rise there in and out, they have more protection
gotcha.
before it flows over into the space. So like the water treatment plant, you know, you envision the big tanks and, you know, so the structures themselves aren't going to the seawater is not going to infiltrate and flow over into the settling basins or anything like that, or the tanks. There's enough concrete there that, you know, it can operate.
What about the fire department?
It's a little more challenged, but I mean, again, I think there's probably ways you could there's probably ways you could, you know, deal with some water flow over there that will need some, as it's monitored, as we continue to see the conditions change. You may do some berming or some other things over there that you know, you might have to incorporate, but I don't think. I mean, we did talk about, you know, do you move the fire department? Is
Right.
there another piece of property further away? But that's not where we are today. And I think we have a lot of, I say a lot, again, define a lot, you know, is it going to happen in the next 10 years? No. Is it going to happen in the next 50 years? Then the 50-year solution might be different than the 5 or 10-year solution.
But we're not looking that far
Well,
out, or
I think we're trying to look at some near-term stuff right now, but those other ones take a little bit of study. And I think what's always interesting is as we work with all the data mapping information that we get, all the, you know, from Maryland, I think we felt very confident in what the models looked like in the near term. When you got out into the, you know, 50 years from now, there's less confidence in what that model is going to do. And so some of these solutions, we've looked at where we felt more confident in what the model looked like, because it did track pretty good over the last 15 years. I think you'd probably see some of that data.
I know at the 50-year part, we're talking open water and
Yeah.
all kinds of things.
Yep,
That,
and-
and in my mind, you know, should the town be looking at property, not you know, to buy now and hold or whatever,
Right.
in the event that those are pretty critical things to us.
They are. I mean, and I think the wastewater treatment plant, you're not going to move like
Okay.
that. That's never going to move. That's not going to move. Could the fire department move? It could. I don't think it's something that necessarily needs to be on the discussion right now.
Okay.
In the plan, it talks about sea level is projected to rise 2.4 feet through 2050. What's the baseline for that? 22,000?
That's a good question.
I think.
wait.
I don't remember in there.
I think it is 2,000.
I think it
And
was.
So we're halfway there.
Yeah, and that
So
and that would
we've
be
already seen 1.2 feet.
that was the data I said. You know, like that's tracked pretty consistent. I think in 2050 we're going to be where that says, and I think most of Maryland would agree with that. And I think they have a dot. I don't know. I don't talk to them anymore, but the Maryland State Planning folks, I think I think they changed some of the requirements of what you use in your planning factors for sea level rise, and I think everybody felt good at that 2.4 number. I think it goes like 7.4 or 7 something in the 2100, but that's where there's a lot less fidelity in what that data is going to really be.
What would it take for Maryland State to permit the Seagate to allow the runoff in the bay?
Well, and I wouldn't say it's runoff, but I would. It's a discussion with that. It's a planner. It's somebody in the MDE saying, "Hey," and again, I think some of it's timing, right? I think of when. So that plant went in, I think, shortly after Isabel. And maybe the 2005 timeframe. Isabel was 2003. I want to say that property was raised and the plant was put in maybe in the 2005 timeframe. And I know there's been a bunch of discussion about who did those improvements and different things like that. But that pumping station exists today, and I think at the time there was reluctance from the state to do that. North Beach, I don't know when they did it. They have that. They have a pumping station up there around 9th Street, and they do direct discharge, and so it's getting to the right people and explaining the situation that we are facing, and just convincing them that's the right thing to do. And that's why it might be a limited use permit that allows us to do it when we hit a certain flood stage or things like that. So I think if I had to predict, it may be some sort of conditions-based permit that might come back to us to allow us to do that discharge.
What do those conditions do you think look like?
Like the flood gets to a certain, like we have a flood level of a certain point, and when we only operate it until it hits, it comes back down to some agreeable level or something like that is what I would, if I were in like that's how I would probably negotiate it. But I won't be the one in there probably having those discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have some questions.
I'm not dismissing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Off with you. He said it's been a long day. Thank you, Jeff, for your report. You know, I think it's, one of my thoughts is, obviously, this is a fluid document. I hate to say that. You're welcome.
We
But
object or agree or.
no, you don't object, of course, never. But I say that in the fact that there's such an unpredictability right now. I mean, we've just seen recently in North Carolina with the hurricanes and in Florida. And if you would have mentioned months ago that the storm would go west, I mean,
Right.
they
Right.
with the information that I've seen, there weren't many indications that that was going to happen. And historically, it had never taken that path. So in light of that, with the fluidity of this document, do you see any immediate changes that you would make to this document?
Not re- I
Mhm.
don't. I mean, I think, again, we saw it, like you said, it's all about the track of the storm. So there's two. There's like, we have the storm events, and then we are certainly seeing more of the non-named storm event nuisance flooding type stuff, and some of that's happening because of our infrastructure. So we certainly have challenges where, because our discharges are at certain elevations into the bay, and there's not backflow preventers or we get a lot of flooding that comes up through our storm system in those, when we have winds coming from the south, blowing blowing all the water up to the head of the bay, and there's nowhere for it to go. And then you throw the, Hunter Moon and all the tides, and we get these really elevated bay levels, and that's when our storm, and then you get a rain event on top of it, and that's when our system really fails. So that's kind of what I would call like our nuisance flooding. And I think it's great that the town has the little app, where you can go out and take pictures and talk about where they are, because it helps us collect some data to understand, all right, what did the event look like that caused this, and then how extensive was it as we piece that together. And so, we had one around Halloween maybe 3 years ago that was pretty challenging from a flooding perspective. So that's one condition, Kathleen, where I think we already know that exists, and we think we know kind of how it happens. And then you have the big storms, and anytime they pass to the west of us and we're on the right-hand side of that, counterclockwise flow, we get hammered. If they can stay off the coast a little bit and we're blowing everything down the bay, we're golden. Like, we can handle as much rain as we want when we have those types of, when it stays offshore from a big named storm type of event. It all comes down to the track, but I don't think there's anything that we don't really understand how it like what we're going to see.
Mhm. The other thing I want to mention that I think it's really vital that the Coastal Resiliency Steering Committee, and you said you're not sure what capacity it will continue, but I think certainly, I mean, you have a well educated and knowledgeable body that you've worked to create this document. And I think in regards to planning and zoning, I think it's an incredible resource that you would advise. For example, as you said, in the comprehensive plan, we approach it from a different perspective. It seems like we're concerned about overdevelopment in these critical areas, but your note of possibly one solution doesn't fit all when the hillside is safe, but you don't want to have the solution for the hillside be the same in the lower lying areas. And I think that it's great information for us as planning and zoning to have. So I think that a greater collaboration between the two bodies, certainly when we're addressing some of these issues, I think would be very beneficial. And my only other question is, I noticed you had talked about in the report that there's a collection there's a collection that you're seeking of data from citizens, and you're asking them to report incidences of flooding that
Right.
they've experienced. Has that been, are people willingly participating in that? Do you?
I think so. I mean,
are you
again, I
getting
think that's
data?
why Holly pushed that out when we had that recent flooding. I know Jay collected a lot of data a couple years ago. Like anytime we have some of those big nuisance floods, I know I've seen blasts come out that say go to this app and upload it. And I think people are willing. I know I know Charlie on town council has sent stuff in. You know, I know people have submitted information. I haven't gone and actually reviewed that data, but I know
Okay.
I do know just, you know, kind of word of mouth, people have used it.
Good, good. Vice Chair?
Yes, I, thanks.
Sure.
My mic. Alrighty, there are a lot of questions. Sorry, where do I start? The whole, you know, when you start out about the nuisance flood and building awareness at the local level.
Jeff, do you want to sit down?
I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm okay.
He's going to be here for an hour.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's gotta end at 8. You said you have to end at 8. It can't go much. I don't think you get an hour.
Okay, so one thing is, you know, you're talking about building awareness, and when I think about just even the critical area, we are limited in this town as far as making our people aware of what the responsibilities are. And I think one thing that maybe this body could be doing to help is perhaps designing some kind of program where we disseminate information, not only on the critical area, but perhaps maybe with the idea that we have flooding issues and what can we do and what can we project to be doing.
And I didn't make it this year. I had some other stuff going. I mean, I made it to the event, but I didn't think far enough ahead. But like a couple years ago when we had Taste of the Beaches, both at Abner's and then back here on Kellum's, I had some big, so there's flooding maps that are in the report printed up with some grommets. And, you know, we had a booth set up, and, you know, I would kind of just stood out in front of the booth and I would attack if they even hesitated as they were walking by. I would launch and kind of try to engage them in a discussion, because again, you know, it's not everybody's going to come up and start that conversation. So I just tried to be out in front, and, you know, if somebody hesitated and looked at the map, I'd try to explain it to them and talk to them and, hey, do you have any questions? You want to talk about this at all? And so I think when we have community events, that's an opportunity for us to break out maps and have, you know, a table, whether it's shared with C-Box, whether it's shared with, you know, other stuff. You know, I just have to tune myself in and try to make sure I'm out in front of it and, you know, try to coordinate to participate in those.
Well, I think that's great. I mean, if we can do that as volunteers, but I think also we should have a coordinated effort with realtors. When people purchase properties, especially in the critical area, they need to understand what possibly be down the road. We should alert people that pretty much hand them this, make them sign off that they understand what's going on and what's down the road for them. But I think, you know, we're missing a good opportunity to inform people as they move into new property down here. So I think we should immediately be doing something with real estate, you know, groups that are in town. So I think community outreach is one thing we need to be doing. Then we go into, you talked about what can we do to, let me see if I can read exactly what it was. Essentially, ensure existing structures or future structures to be resistant to flood-related damage. So what can we do in the planning, in the codes that would ensure, you know, should they be built a certain, you know, I know we're talking about height, but not even height. Do you build it?
I think you all talked about that in your zoning. You had something where you went above the FEMA requirement for building in the 100-year floodplain, where you added, I think, or maybe we talk about in this report, we say maybe you add an extra foot or two to your, so, with all the FEMA maps, there's a bottom elevation at which your livable structure has to be above in order to qualify for flood insurance, or else you're uninsurable and some things like that. So you have these FEMA maps in the floodplains, and it sets a level. But I think the plan may say, we may want to adopt something more stringent as we look at that and say, if you're in a certain area, you're required to go 3 feet above, to build some extra cushion in. And so I think that's one of those areas where, again, looking at, what could you do, zoning wise or ordinance wise, that's an area where you might build in some added cushion that would go above and beyond.
Or, well, I'm even referring to building products
Yeah.
or types of landscaping or other
Yeah.
things
I
that
mean,
should
and
be pertinent to this situation,
And
not just
the
height.
challenge, I
But
won't
yeah.
say it's a challenge. I mean, it's that dynamic, I think, that the town's faced with, where we issue the zoning permit, but the count, we adhere, if I understand correctly, it's really the county's building code that we adopt. Like, are they IBC and overlay? Yeah, but I'm not sure how much you want to get into changing the building, some of the materials, and what I would call like hurricane elements or things like that, or that I don't know how much the town wants to take that on, honestly. And again, in some ways it's inherent on the property owner to figure out how important their structure is to them. And there's nothing that says they can't, have a better design, a more resilient design. But I'm not sure that that's a discussion for the town, I think, to have about how far do you want to dig into what you adopt for your building code.
So you haven't really discussed, well, you do talk about ensuring property or resistance to flooding and that kind
Yeah.
of thing. So I'm just wondering how far beyond, the freeboarding type situation, how
Well,
far
and I think
have
there
we
is some things
gone?
about, like, are there ways that you adapt some, like, one of the things we also have a group we're working with, from a group of students from the University of Maryland who are, so I think there's some kids working on their master's programs. But are there ways, and the challenge is, because of where our water table is, if you're other places, sometimes you can bury tanks and you can create settling tanks and hold water when it floods, and then let it discharge out and use it for rainwater, use it for irrigation and things like that. Our challenge is, if you try to bury something, you're floating, you're floating in the water table. And so, that would be a solution, but maybe not here, So, I think more exploration could be done about how do you manage flooding on different types of sites. Whether it's through landscape design and things like that. There are things you can do, but how effective it is. And I think one of the other challenges is we have a lot of small sites. So unless you had, I'll use the horrible word, developer, come in and have a couple sites, but they have the ability, they have more ability to absorb some of those improvements into a 5-site, if they took 5 lots and put them together and located, some duplexes on it or something, they have more ability to design in some remediation effects or mitigation effects into a site like that than an individual homeowner does.
That's if we've got it in the code that they should do it. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't do it.
Well,
that's
But
the
as
catch-22.
when you review and you negotiate with them, I think there are things you can talk about.
Right, but due to financial reasons, they probably wouldn't do it if it wasn't in our code. I just bringing that up.
Yeah.
And then the other thing we bring up here is purchasing properties and buyout of properties.
So,
What do you mean by all that?
well, in like North Carolina, there was some stuff in the news. So most of those are federal programs or state programs. there's no indication from the town that the town would go, like, I think there's an awareness of some people, maybe somebody has a property that habitually floods, but maybe there's a program out there that they don't know about and it's something they would consider. I don't think anybody would ever, I don't think there's any desire from the town or anybody on any committee or anything like that. That's, we're not in a position where we're forcing people from their homes, but there is an awareness piece of it. You talk about outreach. I think, there might be somebody that says, oh, I just want to be out of here. And maybe there's some federal program that allows them to get some compensation for a piece of property that they no longer want to be attached to. But there's no plan, there's no approach, there's no desire that the town's going to go through and market to people and say, hey, we'd like you to go, and I got this great plan for you. I mean, that's not it, but it's at least acknowledging that there are programs that exist today and may develop later down the road, depending on what types of grants are available and things like that, but they're usually state and federal run.
So they're talking about elevating I don't know if it's revetment, right? Or is it revetment?
Revetment, yeah.
Revetment, elevating the revetment along Bayfront in Area A. So if you elevate that revetment, then you've got to pretty much elevate all of it going all the way down, right? Or you have to, how does that work?
Again, that's where there's got to be more engineering study. Right now, what the challenge in that area is, it's an overflow situation. The water comes in and there's nowhere for it to go, and then it settles in down below. So, and all those discharges are at that lower elevation, so they can't discharge. So it just acts like a big swimming pool when it comes over the seawall. So, but the answer isn't just build a seawall higher, because then you create a larger invert slope back into some low point. And so again, there would have to be some additional studies tied to what the storm infrastructure looks like to see if that's something that would be viable and how that would work.
Such a complicated problem.
It is.
It's just overwhelming to think of how much is going to be involved with studying. And I think Larry's point is well taken. I assume that when it comes to, if you move things in the town, whatnot, probably the planning commission will be involved at some point and somehow in some way. But at this point, I guess we just don't know how that's going to play out and how we're going to be involved. But it seems like there's a lot of planning involved with this particular document.
I think there's a lot of data so there's some engineering studies that could happen. And again, and I think they're doing some of it, like understanding what's happening out there at Kellum's, and then just looking at, Jay's got a lot of data on the settlement issues related to Gordon Stinnett Avenue and what the pipes look like under there. I mean, again, in an ideal world, people, there are places where they build roads on piles and they're supported and the road's not going to sink, but everything around it's going to continue to settle. I mean, that's an expensive solution, right? I mean, so that's not something that we're necessarily advocating, but I just think there are lots of things that can be considered as you look at where do you want to make investments, whether it be private or public investment. Again, part of this plan isn't all about public investment. Some of this is just so private citizens have an awareness of how much of a private investment do they want to make in their piece of property. It's not that all of this is expected to be publicly funded. Some of it, you have a personal responsibility in some ways to, how are you going to protect your property? I mean, but again, so the people on some of the seawall, they don't own that. So it's out of it, like they can't, even if they wanted to do something, they couldn't go do that. But this document is intended to help people make informed decisions, whether it's private or public investment.
So with the state highway not being interested in wanting to make adjustments now in 260 going north and south. I'm sorry, 261 going north and south. I'm sorry, 261 going north and south. How does that play out as far as future development and whatnot? How do we plan when we don't know what the future infrastructure may or may not be like. So in other words, do we put more density in there when you're concerned that we may not have, egress out of in or out of the town? There's a complication there, you don't know what to.
I mean, honestly,
anticipate.
there's not much room for intense development over, like, everything's built out there. I mean, all you're going to get is some infill, if anything, where it's a 1-for-1 replacement. And I mean, there's not a lot of intense development that can happen there. Go ahead.
Well, I mean,
Isn't there intense development that they're currently litigating against?
Well, I
over
wouldn't call
there?
it not in the Seagate. I mean, there's some townhomes that I would not call several townhomes intense development. I mean, that's not intense. Intense development is another Horizons on the Bay or something where you're putting 80 units in a small footprint. I mean, there's some variation in what I think some people on intense development.
I guess my question is, so if 261 isn't anticipated to be,
Right now,
right?
I'd say right now.
Okay, so you think there's a possibility
Oh,
there
no,
might be
I
changes
think-
down the road? But the question is, as a planning unit, how do we put that into our framework as far as planning when you might have infill, you might have just new development, but it might be in an area where, let's just say, C Street and some of those side streets, won't be amenable to any extra development. I mean, we would be remiss in thinking that we should be giving out permits in an area that.
Yeah, well, I would say though, the parcels you're talking about are much higher than the existing homes already today that exist there. So
No, it's not the houses. I'm talking about the roads that get to
yeah, I
the
know.
infrastructure.
But I mean, the road is a problem today for the houses already there. Adding additional housing there doesn't change the problem of the existing homes that are already at a lower elevation than.
Oh, no, I understand. I just think, are you going to add more problems to
No,
that
you're not.
situation? I don't know. I mean, but it's a conundrum throughout that entire area and also Fishing Creek. I mean, how much do we consider the current infrastructure to be not adequate for any new development? And that's as far as flooding is concerned.
I'll take off my.
I mean, I'm sorry.
It's-
I know.
So I would say, I'll take off my steering committee chairman hat, and I would just say, I think the biggest, like the water treatment plant has the capacity. The water distribution system has the capacity. The roads I think the biggest challenge is the level of the roads from a capacity standpoint. But I think when you look at traffic studies, I don't think you're going to see this if you were here before the bridge was done, the traffic was terrible at that intersection at Mears. But I'm not saying we should go back to, a level F, intersection from a rating perspective. But what I would say is, if you say the infrastructure can't support any development, I don't know what part of the infrastructure exactly you're talking about, because I think the water treatment plant has the capacity, the substations have the capacity, the road has the capacity. I think it's really a policy decision of where do you want development. I don't think it's a capacity issue, and that's a different discussion. I don't want to go into that part of it.
Okay, I think I thank you. You've answered. Thank you.
Sure.
Back on what we can do now. I think about Seagate.
Right.
Every time we talk about any of this, I think about Seagate and their property values.
Yeah.
And if we as a town don't pursue getting our discharge out into the bay, that is going to be a huge problem.
So it is being pursued. I mean,
Yeah.
it is being
Is that
pursued.
your steering committee's
No, it's-
responsibility or
It's
the
the town.
town?
It's the town.
okay, all right.
But we are there to help advise that that's a good effort, that will result in a benefit to the town, I guess, is how we got there. Is we helped confirm that there's value to there's value, that solution brings value to the town and would help, would
right.
help a resiliency problem that the town is facing.
Okay.
But it's not we're not leading, we're not necessarily the ones executing that plan or that funding or anything like that. The town is. We're just there to say, yeah, this is a valuable effort and we think it's worthwhile. We recommend that you continue to pursue that because
Urgent,
it will have an
certainly.
impact. It could have
Yeah.
a positive impact on the town
Yes.
and directly those residents.
Yeah.
But it's not ours to.
I was
Yeah.
just trying to
Yeah,
clarify
no,
if we were just kind of thinking about doing it.
no,
It sounded like
I mean,
a
the
neat
meetings-
idea,
The
but
meetings are happening. Holly and Jay and them have had the meetings.
Good.
And Wayne, town engineer, he's heavily involved. And I haven't talked to Holly in the last month. And so, because I had some travel, and so I don't know where the current status of that effort.
Well, I agree with you, Jeff, that the town certainly is very interested in getting that gate operational. And my, just my perspective, the state certainly seemed to listen to it and was trying to determine when actually that edict was made and
Who the right
and-
person, I mean, they really did seem interested in getting us to the right person in the right division within MDE and DNR so that we could maybe have success. And that's half the battle sometimes, is getting to the right people to plead your case to, because sometimes you got to weave through that bureaucracy sometimes. And I know you all know it as well as the town council, the bureaucracy of SHA and everybody. I mean, we talk a lot about the safe routes to school, and like, it's tough. This stuff doesn't happen overnight, but it does. I know they are actively engaged trying to get to the right people to try to advance that solution.
yeah, I agree. Thank you very much.
Sure.
It's obviously very informative, and it's excellent to hear from you as the chair of this of the steering committee that developed this whole plan. So thank you. Your insight and your knowledge is very helpful to us. And
And
thank
I
you.
wasn't trying to get all, like, so, sometimes I'll share thoughts, and again, I just want to make sure it's not, some of those aren't reflective of the entire committee, but it's just some based on my experience. And I just thought it's worth sharing with your body.
We're totally holding you accountable to all your comments tonight, but
this is a video.
I know, it's a somewhat charged environment these days, and I don't, I'm not in it. Like, that's not, I don't want to be a part of that. I just really want to help kind of stay engaged on something that I think is important to the town. And there's lots of good people with lots of ideas, and that's why we do want the input from the town, because there's lots of smart people in the town, and hopefully, somebody's going to some point come up with some great ideas.
well, I certainly think you're one of those smart people. And for us, as a commission, it's great to listen to the issues of coastal resiliency from a civil engineer perspective, because as you shared, we make decisions, and not necessarily from that perspective, but certainly, as I mentioned, the 35 feet, we come from a different perspective. But I think your input and your, food for thought, as far as perhaps there shouldn't be a cookie cutter because of the environment. And frankly, it's good to know that there are many options. There isn't just A or B, but there are other strategies. And your point about it's not about capacity of the development. The homes are there, the road can handle it, the plant. We just need to know different ways to look at solutions for that. So I greatly appreciate.
Good luck with the rest of the year.
Thank you. See you in 2025.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we will move on to signage. So, Good night, Jeff. Thank you. Sarah,
So,
are you going
Um,
to kick us off here?
sure. So I provided a couple of examples of other sign ordinances in the state, and also Vice Chair Greengold provided an example. And I think they're all useful. I think the sign regulations that you have right now are a good framework, and they have a lot of what you want in them. But there are some areas that can be strengthened. And so these examples all kind of have food for thought for y'all to think about how you want this to look, what you're looking for with signs, and how we can strengthen the ordinance. So one of the areas, the St. Michael's one has many more than the Mount Airy one, but was the definitions. You know, there's only 3 definitions in our ordinance, and that could be really strengthened to make things more clear. I thought that I liked the charts in the Annapolis one because they were very easy to see and understand, but you don't have quite as many districts. So I don't know if that's of interest to y'all or not. And one of the things that I thought you all might like about La Plata was that it had, if I'm remembering them correctly, La Plata was the one with the pictures, or yes, it had some pictures and diagrams in it, which could kind of help with the understanding of those measurements as people are reading the ordinance. And I don't know, if you guys, when you were looking at them, had areas that seemed like, oh, I'd like to see us kind of strengthen this or that. So I just wanted to provide them for your thought. Those were my reasons for picking the ones that I picked. But I'd like to hear what you all thought of.
Oh, so what did you see wrong with our current ordinance?
So I think the current ordinance could have more clear and detailed definitions, or at least address more signs. So there's the definitions, and then there are places that address different kinds of signs. But I think it could talk about more different types of signs than it does. I also think that there could be more sort of variability in the size of the signs based on distance from roads. That could go into there. And I think that diagrams make things easier for people who are looking at the ordinance to see what they're allowed, understand. So that's something that I think could help your businesses, and I guess just mainly the businesses, see what's allowed. So, but I mean, overall, what you have is good. I don't think you need to redo it entirely. I just think there's a few places you can strengthen it.
Yeah, as I look at it, I mean, the example of Mount Airy or Annapolis or La Plata,
Mhm.
those are all big towns.
Yes.
As opposed to us, which have almost no commercial area.
Right.
And so I don't see a need to make drastic changes. And I don't know that anyone's asked for any changes. Has anybody been turned down for a sign?
So the planning commission asked to review the sign regulations. That's
Okay.
why we're reviewing.
Right, but nobody outside the planning commission. Other than the rod and reel.
Well, there's a couple non-compliant signs, which is a separate issue, but yes.
Yes, please.
Larry, I think Commissioner Brown, it's really a concern that I've had, that I don't feel that what we have really offers a commercial side or a business person enough guidance if they do set up. I know we don't have a lot, but if they do come into town, if we had the old library site or the old, or some of the, where the Verizon, I mean, there are some areas that that are available. And then, of course, we have some other businesses, believe it or not, in town that are not even located in this area. They're in the middle subdivision. We've got even some businesses in Richfield Station, I noticed the other day. But I think, when it comes to signage, there's so many different types of signs today that, unless you identify it, you might have just a conglomeration of signage that could clutter up even just this little area, just with, a few businesses. So I think not only do we have to identify the different signs, because there's so many different types of signs, we may not want all these different types of signs. We may want to, and also, if you do a signage program right, everything's sort of coordinated in the sense that, the town has a certain look sign. If you go to North Beach, you'll see, I even at one time photographed it, but I don't even know where they are anymore because it was a long time ago. But if you go, they have actual, specified directional signage that indicates, okay, this is where our restaurants are, or this or that. I mean, we have a couple out here in the front. We have one that is over showing where the water park and that area is. We do have some of those, but I noticed that some of them are they're oversized. They just look oversized. It just doesn't seem like either they're conforming to a certain standard, or we don't have a certain look. I think we do have some kind of a standard. We do have kind of a symbol on some of these signs out here, CB or something on it. I should have had a picture of that. But when it comes to even over there in the rod and reel, I know, Larry, you don't come over. Yeah, I don't know, maybe you do, but we have flags. We have all kinds of flags at any one time going on and off and doing all kinds of things. And it just seems to be a conglomeration of signage somehow just in this one little area. Maybe it's just me who sees it or cares about it, but if you have a sign program that people can, that conform to and that adhere to, it makes for a neater looking town, a town that is a little more impressive to look at. So I just thought it was time to re-examine our sign code and see if we wanted to insert anything new in our definitions, or any changes that we want to make as far as, some of the, codes that, we ask people to adhere to. So it was really me. Just blame me. But if you all don't want to look at it or address it, now, Ms. Franklin, I think also sees that we need to have a few changes. I don't know. Is it not true? I mean, what?
No,
In
I
other
mean, I
ways?
think you can definitely add tweaks. What I'm hearing is that maybe there's more of a desire to create some uniformity in signage. And that's kind of a question for you all, because that can be put into this, but it is more restrictive on businesses. So if you guys want to look at creating a district where the signs are sort of
Well,
more
for example,
regulated.
we have a new sign that was put up that we had that I don't think the town had any say in, right here at the corner where the hotel is.
Mhm.
And I don't think it conforms to any sign regulation or anything. And I think you know what I'm referring to.
Yeah, I was going to say.
The electric lights.
No, it's the one that's, do you know what I'm talking about? The one with the identifying the bridge. It's the, dedication to the something or other, but it came up one weekend and it
Gerald
was,
Donovan.
yeah, right, exactly.
Is that
The dedication of the bridge.
Yeah.
Identifying
Yeah.
that.
Is it a state
It's
sign?
his name. No,
It's just one the
honoring
Rod and
him.
Reel put up, but it's right next to the bridge. But if we have people starting to just put up signs all the
Mhm.
way up and down the road, we just get sign clutter, but they never came to the town to get it approved. I'm not picking on that business. That's what I'm thinking of right now. They just threw it up one day. But it's a big wooden one and it's got, names on it and whatnot. But I'm sorry? I heard it was just thrown up and nobody got any approval for it. I don't know.
It might be that some of the signs that you're seeing and are concerned about are just not compliant, because there are signs that are not compliant.
Mhm, mhm.
And we are aware of them. And I haven't actually, because I haven't been here that much over the last month, spoken with Holly about like the status of, reaching out to those folks and saying your sign is non-compliant and it needs to be brought into compliance with the town's code. So
Right. Well, I mean, and there are a lot of temporary, I just want to make sure that what we have is temporary signage, weekend signage, you have a lot of, we may not have it right here in our town, but along 260, you'll have a lot of signage on the weekends. Obviously non-compliant, stuff, but I just thought it was time for us to review this, make sure that, and if nobody wants it uniform, it's okay with me, but I just want to make sure that we have signage that we all think is okay. In my last town, we didn't approve signage that went on roofs. Here, it looks like they allow rooftop signage, So, every town has a different. No, you're not? No? Well, we have rooftop signage on the Rollins. We have, all those are on a roof. And it's, on the roof.
Roof?
On the roof.
Where are you?
On top of the roof.
potato.
I didn't, I was
the top of
surprised
the
to see it
building?
because I'm not used to having it on
Yeah.
the roof, but it's on the roof. Anyway,
Yeah.
I just, no,
Well,
she's not sure.
it can't project more than 3 feet above the roof or more than 14 inches out from the wall to which it is attached.
But yet if if Verizon had their sign on the roof, in fact, you can still see where, a lot of those, well, if you go over there, you'll see what I mean, but
Yeah. Maybe it's that we need to just do a, in-depth sort of look at all of the signs that are there.
well, and it's perhaps true that the fact that we haven't really been we haven't enforced a lot of this. Maybe what I'm looking at is just things that are not compliant with our code, and maybe that's part of our problem. But I just know by the fact we don't have any definitions that it would seem to me a concern that if you're going to try and put something into compliance, they have to understand what kind of sign it is we're talking about. Because how do you define what? I don't even know what those things are called that fly in the wind that are they're like 20 feet tall and they're like flags.
they're
Oh, the little
banner-
tube guy?
I don't even know what they're called, but
Feather flag.
they're a feather. They're a feather. Yeah, right, exactly. And I just saw that, a feather sign. But that needs to be in here because I know we get those feathers out here all the time. So one way or the other, if we're going to allow them, we need to, put it in our code is what I'm trying to say. And I don't think it's in here ever. No,
Yeah, there's
it's not
a-
in here.
Pennants or banners, but you could consider them a pennant, but you could also kind of add feathers to that, right?
Well, or whatever. Is that
Yeah.
the official name of it, Larry? A feather? I don't know.
it is.
Is
I'm
that
pretty
the name
sure
of those
that's
kind
what
of
they're called? But
Yeah.
they could be a kind of a pennant or a band. They could fall under that because we don't have a definition for them and a sign. So there's two ways to do it. And the way you've done it has been more vague, right? So a sign is any structure or part of a structure or device that, it's anything that has this information on it.
communicates
Which
information.
means it captures more things. So I would say adding more definitions, not necessarily bad, but leave a other sign as a definition to capture anything. Because, the feather signs are fairly new, right? So there's going to be new sign designs all the time.
Right.
But
Right.
certainly I think one of the ways that the lack of definitions is addressed in the ordinance here is by kind of identifying specific signs in the ordinance
Mhm.
without like definition of them. You have hot air balloon and searchlights, pennants and banners, sandwich type. But as new signs are developed, feathers aren't specifically in here. So
Mhm,
someone
mhm.
might decide to argue with me that their feather is not a pennant, right?
Right,
Um,
right. And I guess, would you allow awnings with messages on them and just, again, I'm not trying to make it complicated, but I just think it's something that we don't want to wait until they actually put an awning up with the sign on it. We want to make sure that it's allowable and that it's, appropriate. So, again, I don't think that's,
mhm.
we don't have what kind of an awning and how the awning is supposed to look and how far, all that kind of stuff.
I think an awning, if it has displays or includes any numeral, letter, word, model, banner, emblem, insignia, device, trademark, or other representation, then it's going to be a sign, right? So
So do we have that definition in our code? Because I don't see
yeah,
it.
so
Where is
a
that?
sign is it's
Oh,
kind of
you're just talking about the general signage.
so
I
in
hear
our
what you're saying.
code, a
Mhm.
sign, yeah, right.
Yeah.
A sign is defined
Mhm.
as any structure, part thereof, or device attached hereto, or painted or represented thereon, or any other material or thing, illuminated or otherwise, which displays or includes any numeral, letter, word, model, banner, emblem, insignia, device, trademark, or other representation used as or in the nature of an announcement, advertisement, direction, or designation of any person, firm, group, organization, place, commodity, product, service, business, profession, enterprise, or industry, which is located upon any land, on any building, or in or upon any window or indoors in such a manner as to attract attention from the outside of the building.
Right, right. Okay, so does that mean like a sidewalk board? Are
So-
you allowed to have a sidewalk board on the sidewalk and where is it allowed,
So, right. So the A-frames are specifically addressed in item number 14 in the ordinance. One sandwich type A-frame sign is permitted per business on premises,
right.
subject to the following. Each signboard shall not exceed 12 square feet. The total height is not to exceed 36 inches. The sign shall be located so as not to restrict sight distance below what is called for in the town road ordinance, and the owner shall obtain a permit for the sign. However, the size of the sign will not count against the total signage allowed under subsection G1B of this section. So it's like the A-frame is extra signage beyond what you're normally allowed. And then I think what you might be seeing is, okay, you've got your regular signage, you've got an A-frame, which doesn't count. You've got banners, which are temporary, so they don't count. You've got flag signs, which are temporary. So it's feeling like it's adding up to more. And so maybe there needs to be kind of a cap on that, even, here's your regular sign cap, right?
Mhm, yeah.
And here's your temporary sign
Mhm.
cap as well to kind of limit that.
I think the other question though is like, do we want to have, when it comes to digital and sounds and all the different, I'm sorry?
They're not permitted.
Yep. Number
Well, I know,
10.
that's what I was getting to, is that's not in here and
Yes, it is.
It is in here.
See, number
Yeah.
10, no sign shall have moving parts or project
Oh,
any
right.
intermittent
No,
or
no,
flashing.
it is addressed, but I mean, it's
It's happening anyway.
it's addressed and we're either going to allow it or not allow it, but it's,
So we're not compliant.
we're not,
We're
it's
here to-
another non-compliance,
Those
but
are non-compliant.
do we want to allow it is my point.
No.
Oh. I mean, I guess, yeah, that's one of the questions is, do we allow some of the things that are already out
Mhm.
there? Do we change this code to conform to what's already out there? I guess is another way to look at this. I mean, how many ways can we go down and just start ripping down signs that have been up there for 10 years? How can we do, what we usually do is we go and change our code to conform to what is already, we're used to having, such as the digital sign of the rod and reel and that kind of thing.
And you obviously don't want a lot of signs that are flashing lights and all of that kind of thing. And at the same time, you have the school that has a sign that has scrolling information on it.
witches. And they never came to the town to ask. And, again, we never really had a probably clear enough ordinance for them to come and look anyway, but we didn't go and, enforce it one way or the other. So now we have to go back and change this to,
The question is, do you want to make this distinction between the school that has this gently scrolling information and flashing? Right.
Well, could it also be grandfathered? I mean, obviously we're moving to a digital era. So people having a sign that just isn't digital right now and they have a new structure, they're probably going to want to go where the information changes. And so I would think, though, we can't certainly go back to removing these signs after people have already bought them in good faith, but perhaps we need to grandfather. But I do think that we should address the signage, just because obviously everybody's mentioned there are signs up, and I know that town administrator was looking at the permitting process for different matters such as trees, getting a permit for trees, and perhaps signage is one of those also that would require an application. So
It does.
so make sure that that's also included too in the language for the permit. But I know, for example, in my neighborhood, people have tried to control parking by creating and posting their own sign saying you can't park here unless you have unless you're you live, for example, on the cul-de-sac. Well, that is totally wrong. It's if you're a Chesapeake Beach resident, you can park in Chesapeake Beach. You can't constrict the parking on a cul-de-sac. It's a public street. But then people have tried to control parking in front of their home, and they have their own makeshift sign. And those, so there has to be
Those aren't really
conformity, there
allowed.
has to be compliance. And it would seem to me that everybody can't just put up their own makeshift sign to determine what they want done at their convenience. So,
Those aren't permitted in residential districts.
right.
So
So they're there.
They're
but, I mean,
non-compliant.
Easy to get them
Right.
removed if you call the town, because I have in our neighborhood.
oh yeah, everybody has them. On
But,
this
but when I have
sign.
called town about some of them, they come and they remove them. So if you call about it and they're a non-permitted sign, one of them came down within like a week or two when I called specifically. Just
because I've seen some signs by me that like this, if you live at this place or this place, and they give the address and they're made of wood, you can park here. And I'm like, okay, good to know.
I mean, I think a big problem is just enforcement. There's no question. But again, we do need to address laser signs, digital signs, anything electronic. We've got to address that somehow. I feel, and I think we have to be a little more careful about just being sloppy with, just anything goes, or, whatever happened 20 years ago is fine. We may want it a little more controlled. I don't know. Yes.
Revising all the different signs that I have no problem. Consistent look or consistent color or something like that. But to talk in generality is very difficult for me. I would need to be, looking at feathers and this and that, that sort of thing. to plow through it, I guess.
I would break it down. If we were going to be doing this, I would break down this whole code and start with perhaps just the beginning, which would be an introduction to why we're doing a sign. I mean, everybody seems to have an introduction, and I know Lori goes, "Oh, we don't really need one," but I think you kind of have to have a purpose as to why we want to have a sign ordinance, and I think it wouldn't hurt for us to look at one of these purposes and go, yeah, there's nothing in here that gives us purpose in our own codes. And I think it really would help. So we could look at that one evening, and then another evening we could look at definitions and go over what definitions we need and what we don't need, and and touch them up. So I think we should break this ordinance down. It's just overwhelming. But
Are
if
you speaking of 290-22?
yeah, 290-22 is signs. Yeah. Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Guess it feels like most of the issues though are coming from non-compliance, and like it seems that all of the things are in place. I'm just curious about any specific thing that is a problem that isn't being covered by a current code versus it just being a non-compliant code. And it's because I feel like that's where maybe I'm having the specificity of like what is being allowed that we don't,
Electronic signs is a big one.
but that isn't allowed. Those have just
correct.
gone in
Well,
non-compliant.
But maybe we want to allow it, is my point. Maybe we want to allow some version of it. Maybe we want to entertain. I mean, there's a lot of different types of signage that will be starting to get, more computerized type signage that's going to be used. The old fashioned just put a sign out, just put a piece of paper up there. It's probably old hat, but
I agree with you, Cindy, that breaking it down is going to be important.
We have to
because
break
it's
it down.
It's an enormous.
it took
topic.
me a year the last time I did one of these. It took me a year to go through it, and with a public hearing. You got to have a public hearing, of course. So it's involved, but we can make it. I know it's a small town, and we don't have to go crazy here. We could make it into a 3-month project and just cut this. Well, and fence is another big one. You've got fences on here too, but that could be also a pretty big, ordinance to go over as well. But if we're going to do signage, I think we should start with a purpose and then get into, the definitions that we think are pertinent to our town. And I don't think we have time to start. Maybe we could start it with a purpose tonight. And then maybe next month, get into just definitions, and maybe you have some other idea about beyond definitions.
I would just say to kind of think about definitions as to whether you want to define each sign or kind of create a list of types of signs, right? So you still have your on-premises signs, off-premises signs, right? And then maybe you have a temporary signs and say this shall include banners, feathers, blah, blah, blah. And then you could also say, and any other similar type of sign, because I think you're encompassing everything that could happen. Or the other approach you can take is to define each of those signs, but I would still recommend that there be a definition for other signs that matches the definition you have there, so that something you haven't thought of in your definitions isn't allowed.
Right. No,
Right.
you've got to have the ability to incorporate the sign that we don't anticipate. Yes, I
Right.
understand.
Which is, I think, what was the intention
Mhm.
behind your shorter definitions.
Yeah,
So-
probably true. Yeah. Well, as as we've talked, it's a small town. It's not like we've got a large commercial area, but I've just noticed that there have been a lot of extra signage in this area than we had even 5 years ago. And since I go up and down there all the time, I see all the stuff coming. And I know that when Mr. Jakubiak was here, he said we have to address, and I can try and remember now, when you have new apartment buildings and there was something that we were supposed to address as far as common look within an apartment/condo. He said we had to address what kind of look we want.
Uniformity.
Yeah, uniformity. And he said something about us making that part of our sign program too. And I'm not exactly remembering what he told us, but he said, when you get to the signage, this is when you put, you address uniformity in the multi-unit
Or even in
dwelling
your,
units.
your one, if you, I'm thinking where like this, it's CVS, right? CVS and there's other street, you could have uniformity of signage in that area.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. But I guess the other question is, do we also want to make the uniform look within the town so that we identify, do we want to have this, we've got 3 or 4 different looks on the street signs. So that when you go into Chesapeake Beach, you don't know if you don't know where you're at because you've got different
are you
type.
talking about the town signs? That's really
It's-
not.
It's actually state highways. I mean, it's the signage for the streets. So I know that's a lot of money and people aren't going to look at it right now, but I'm just wondering if at some point people want to address, a really charming town is when you have street signs that have like a little train or a coastal, something that identifies the town. And I know we were talking about that a couple years ago, trying to bring in the charm of the town with that kind of a uniform look too.
Eagle.
Yeah, or whatever we come
Yeah.
up with, but I'm just saying, so that you would have an emblem or some kind of a logo or some kind of a uniform look. Maybe we already have it. I don't even know about it. I don't
So
know.
I think there's public signs versus private signs too. And this ordinance is mostly applying to private signs rather like, yes, the town of Chesapeake Beach needs to make sure that its sign that it puts up complies with the sign ordinance.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to submit a permit and like,
No, I understand.
so I think
Right.
there's 2 different things. There's the ordinance and what it says, and then sort of town sign uniformity.
Right.
I think you're right, Cindy, because
Yeah.
cute,
Mhm.
but there are a whole bunch that aren't, and at a glance, you don't know why.
Yeah, right.
You know,
It's,
should they all be cute?
Yeah, right. right. Yes, exactly. And I had these pictures somewhere, but that was probably 4 or 5 months ago when we started looking at this and we just kept pushing it off. But when you start looking at what makes a charming town, and everybody talks, oh, we're such a charming town, but there's so much more to making a town look like it's cohesive, like it's one unified. Yeah. And I think that's one thing we're lacking here. And if we could look down the road, I know it's a financial commitment and I'm not sure we're able to commit right now, but it would be something that we would possibly have put in place and then address when we have the money to, to do this kind of a beautification program, part of it. And I just, when I started taking pictures and looking down the streetscape, just going down 261 this way, there's a lot of sign clutter. It's just a lot of different types of signage, and it's just so close together. And a lot of it isn't, I'm sure, in compliance. But I don't know if we can look at making that more uniform looking. I mean, it's not like I want Abner's all of a sudden, or Tyler's to change everything all of a sudden. I don't want all that, but I'm just asking you what your thoughts are. How can we address, and then of course we've got the modern stuff down here at the Rod and Reel. We've got, it's just such a conglomeration of stuff. It is a hodgepodge.
And I think that's really a question for the board to kind of decide if you want to pursue and this would be different from what I've provided you really is sort of design guidelines for signs, either throughout the whole town or in specific areas.
I mean, we should
And if
have
you-
one. The question is, can we, have it implemented? And that's the other, I mean, every little town has, not every little town, what am I saying? A lot of little charming towns have this. Do we want to look into something like that now or ever?
All the create something in town, we have to say, look, you know, maybe we can't afford to do it right. But at least we have it written down as an aspiration for the town to look towards.
Two questions. Is that something that would be covered in the scope of what of planning and zoning because of this being privately owned signs? And so like, are we almost kind of having a conversation that's outside of the purview of what we're doing with this? And second, does it make sense to add more regulations when regulations are not currently being enforced? Like, is that a good use of our time?
Well,
Yeah.
I think they are two good questions. But I do think that the reality is, I don't know if we will migrate to adding the cutesy little and uniform signs with a little seagull on it or whatever, but I definitely feel like we should have, I mean, I noticed with these 4 different documents from Annapolis, La Plata, St. Michael's, and Mount Airy. 3 of them, actually, no, I'm sorry. 2 of them start with definitions, and the other 2 start with the intent and purpose, and then they go into mission and scope of the project. But I think the fact that everybody is, you know, more of these signs are popping up and they're more diverse and varied. I think we should put something on the books, and not that I want to have this become the sign police, because the enforcement is a whole nother piece of this. But as you can see, I mean, you know, there's very specific, I've learned very specifically about signs from the current election. You know, they can go up, I think it's 60 days
60 days.
before the election, and then they have to come down the day after the election. But right now, I can tell you, there are signs that have been up much longer than 60 days, but there's no enforcement. So, and will all these signs be taken down? I hope so.
Well, we do have a good person,
Right.
so. Or the mayor, whatever. And she alerts the code person, and the code person then contacts the owner and does whatever has to be done. So I think we are not in the habit of doing that. We've just been sort of a free-for-all for a lot of years, but we're getting to the point where some of us would like those signs not put up for 60 days, taken down the day after, that sort of thing.
So,
But we need consistency.
right. Well, I think the ratting them out. I just think that we should have something more specific, because I think there's such diversity now with the signs. I mean, half of us didn't know what a feather sign is. So I think it's important that we have some guidelines and rules for what signage people can, because, and then we can address right now, in the future, we can have some control over that and uniformity. No different than, you know, building Beach Elementary, that is reflective of the neighborhood and the town. So I think design wise, you know, consistency in neighborhoods, I think is important. So I don't know, it's 7 of 8. And so if this we want to bring and address next month, in November, we can, and we can start with the mission statement and their intent and purpose, if that's agreeable with
Then maybe
everyone.
look at some
And then
things
do
or
the
have
definitions.
you know?
Right.
Put the
Yeah.
sections to.
Well, 4 pages is certainly a lot better than the comprehensive plan, so
Yeah.
I think it's worth addressing. So, if we want to put that on next month's agenda, then
So
If-
what part do we want to actually, do we want to just do purpose and purpose? And let me see here. What do you want to do then for next month? Do we do purpose and intent? Do you want to do a section, like a little section on that and have to either rewrite it or just pull out one of these? We could just probably pull out one of these and just use one of the ones that we've got here.
yeah, and then I would also recommend that we look through the definitions more clearly. And do we need all of them? Do we need some of them? What would be, if you notice, in the in Annapolis, well, they identify prohibited signs, but that might help us identify the type of signs that just familiarize ourselves with all the various signs, because there seems to be many.
And, in the St. Michael's one, they have not only prohibited signs, they have off-premises signs, they have on-site portable sidewalk sign. I mean, it can get so complicated with, the signage. It's shocking, but,
The sign of the time.
the sign of the times. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I guess more importantly, we have to really address this, the electronic digital, signs, and whether we agree with them, don't agree with them. I think at this point, we have to agree with them.
If you guys want to kind of take this in pieces, what I can do is prepare some more concise draft documents for your discussion. I cannot guarantee I'm going to get your intent exactly right, but I will provide you something to start from discussion for
Perfect.
next time.
Perfect.
Excellent.
You can combine all these and just make it into one. And then, yeah, I think that's probably great.
I'll do my best, and then
I
you
know-
can change it to make it how you guys want it.
No, it's fine. Just, yeah.
And then what you might do also in the interim, if you have if you see signs that you have questions about, maybe take a photograph and we could show them as well. And, and then you can weigh in, Sarah, with that type of sign and where it would come under, and is this, more of a trend you see, or so we can guideline. So it's 4 minutes to 8, and
We've had a lightning round. What we want to do?
we can now we'll do comments by commissioners, and then we can make a motion to adjourn. So Commissioner Rutke, we'll start with you. Comments. You're commented out. Okay.
No further comments.
I just want to make sure that everybody knows to go and vote. I was actually able to get an absentee ballot form tonight. Yay. And a ballot so, you can still get an absentee ballot as of today. So if you can't get there on the day of, get one of these absentee ballots and go for it. But we want everybody to go out and vote. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you. I second that thought. November 5th, the voting begins at 7 a.m. and it ends at 8 p.m. So please vote as you desire, but the important thing is to vote.
No comment.
Further comments? No further comments.
All right?
I will move adjournment.
Do I have a second? I thought I might. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Where is the gavel?
It's always the meeting that you need it the most, but